we need to turn away from diesel to hydrogen and ammonia. You can't power ships with batteries, at least not for all your energy needs. So hydrogen and ammonia are two very important molecules, in our view, for the next 3 decades to decarbonize our business. Over the last 10 years, we've developed a technology to power our ships with hydrogen and ammonia.
Hello and welcome to the Regenerative Design Podcast. I'm your host, Mathieu Mehuys, and in this show, I interview the leading authorities in the world of regenerative practices. People who do good and do well. Are you a person that cares about your environment and our planet? Are you a person that wants to leave the planet to our children to be something that we can be truly proud of? Something to enjoy for many generations to come. But are you also a person that believes we can do all of this and do good in business? Well, I have really good news for you. You're here listening to the podcast that is all about making our planet a better place and making your business more successful. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Regenerative Design Podcast. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Alexander Saverys. He is the CEO of CMB Tech, a global company that has a that is working in the maritime business with a diversified services ranging from designing ships to building ships to operating ships on a global scale. He's been getting a lot of attention lately because he is actually on a mission to decarbonize the transportation system, more specifically the maritime, the sea shipping industry. So I'm very excited to talk about that today. Alexander, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me, Mathieu.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you on the show. We're here in your headquarters. It's a home game for you. So to start off, I really want to understand more, like, where did all of this begin? Was it for you as a child already clear that you're going to work in this industry? You obviously have your family has a long history in the maritime industry. I researched it, and it dates back to 1829. Your grandfather was already building ships, so that's beautiful to see that you have such a long heritage. But for you personally, was it always clear that you're going to get into this industry?
No, it was not clear that we were destined to work in the industry, but I think it grows into you when you hear your parents, your uncles talk about the business. Logically, you take interest, you see what is happening, and it's a fascinating industry. It's very diverse, it's very international. So very early on, I was attracted to it. And I actually started outside of the family group first with a small container shipping company, and then joined the company when I was 35 years old.
Well, that's interesting. And you started also with building ships that were used to support the offshore wind mills, and those ships were already running on hydrogen. Can you talk a bit more about how that was developed?
Well, no. I didn't start with that. I started my career with the idea of moving goods from the road to the sea. Mm-hmm. So decarbonization, I would say, at that point was limiting the CO2 emissions per tons transported per mile. That is what we did between 2004 and 2014. Mm-hmm. In 2014, as a group, we were looking at what our strategy should be for the next decades. Yep. And we defined clearly that there were two things we needed to do. One, we could not depend solely on the transportation of coal. Back in 2014, a big chunk of our turnover was transporting coal. And we said, look, if we are only going to depend on that kind of transportation, we will run the risk of having a stranded business, because if the coal transportation goes down and you have ships that can only transport coal, obviously your company will have an issue. So diversifying away from coal was one key strategic pillar that we identified back in 2014. The second is we clearly believed and still believe that offering a green product to our customer, so a ship that emits less CO2, will eventually be something that all our customers will want. And so we decided to look into what kind of low carbon solutions for the maritime industry were available and how we could implement it. You are referring to the offshore wind industry that only came later in our history, that only came in 2020, when, based on the initial pioneering projects we did in 2016, 17, and 18, we managed to design a ship that was indeed running on hydrogen to support the offshore wind parks.
So even before you started with the hydrogen, we can talk about it more. It was already very important for you to work on ways to reduce the impact or the general emissions of transportation system on a global scale, right? So that's where everything started.
Yeah, and the reasons are pretty simple. There's business reasons. First and foremost, regulation is becoming more and more stringent in our industry. That is a process that started, let's say, in 2005, 2006.
Yes.
Emissions were starting to become regulated, first on sulfur, then on NOxes, and then on CO2.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously, we are operating in a world which is regulated, so we need to comply. And if you don't comply, you have to pay heavy penalties. So that's the first business reason for wanting to decarbonize.
Yep.
Second business reason is that public opinion, you and me, want to have sustainable goods.
Yep.
And goods that are also sustainably transported.
Yeah.
So public opinion and hence politics are also putting a lot of pressure not only on us, but also on my customers to offer a green product. There's of course a private reason, which is apart from the business, that I believe that indeed investing in sustainable assets, making sure that the planet that we inherited from our parents, when we give it back to our children, is a better planet.
Yes.
That's a private driver that I have. But private drivers are nice. If you can't make money with it,
Exactly.
you will never be able to be successful. So there's very clear business reasons why we are investing in decarbonization.
Yeah, I think that's a very important aspect that is part of the podcast, showing like, okay, you want to do something good for the environment, you can do it from an ethical standpoint and it's great, but it's going to be difficult to turn it into a business. So it's important to have both aspects. And I think that's what true sustainability is, right? So, but talk about a bit more about your personal reasons. Like, is it something that you grew up with, thinking like, okay, we have this planet and we have to protect it? Did you see some evidences when you were younger, or
I'm a child of the ozone layer that was being depleted. Back in the 80s when I was at school, we were bombarded with the negative news about the ozone layer and what a big impact it had on the South Pole, the North Pole, on our health. And we solved that problem. I think the human being has shown that we can solve big environmental problems.
Oh, yeah.
And, one of the drivers on the CO2 and the decarbonization is, I truly believe that human innovation, human energy to solve issues can lead to good solutions.
Oh, yeah.
And we are in the midst of this process now. The task that we have upon us is, I would say, 1,000 times bigger than the hole in the ozone layer back in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
But I do believe that we also have 1,000 times more tools at our disposal.
And why do you think it's 1,000 times more? Is it because of all the climatological?
Well, I mean, look, when I was born, there were 4 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
Today, there's 8 billion people on the planet. During my lifetime, the total amount of CO2 emissions have skyrocketed for good reason. It has created prosperity.
Exactly.
Thanks to fossil fuels, a lot of people have come out of poverty.
Exactly.
And from a percentage point of view, there's never been as few poor people today. Yes. There's still a lot of poor people in absolute terms. But in terms of percentage of people living on this planet, the issue, of course, is if we continue down this path, we will have catastrophic consequences. So the task is much, much bigger, I would say, because we are many more people on this planet, because we have emitted so much more CO2 than back in the 80s and the 70s when we're looking at the ozone layer issue.
Yep.
But as I just said, I also think that we have tools at our disposal that are much more powerful than what they used to be 40 years ago.
Yeah, I think that looking into that, it's important to also look at developing countries that are going through, or they are finalizing their industrial revolution, and there's ways that we could say like, hey, they should stop using coal and they should stop doing that, but I think it has to go through the same evolution. They're just doing it faster. So I think it's important to look at where we come from in a standpoint of using the fossil fuels to create prosperity and then now move away from it. It's a process that kind of seems inevitable. Or what's your take on on that when it comes down to the developing countries that are
Well, I think first, there's a couple of things that I don't agree with. I don't agree that we should tell developing nations that they cannot develop and that they cannot use fossil fuels. Quite frankly, who are we to tell them? We did it ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
Secondly, I don't agree that they are going through the same industrial revolution as we did.
No.
I think they are skipping phases.
Yep. It's faster process.
Of course. I mean, look, simple things like telephone cables, not needed anymore.
No.
Because there's wireless communication possible. Things like having all electrical cables everywhere in a country. Is that needed? No. You can decentralize your energy production. You can store your energy thanks to renewable processes, batteries, and all the new technologies that are there.
Yep.
So I think in a way, developing nations have the advantage of having technology at hand that will make their economic growth much more efficient and, of course, much less carbon intensive. But this being said, I don't think we can tell them they cannot use oil or coal or gas, all these fossil fuels. I think what we need to do is partner up with developing nations and see how we can decarbonize our industry by using products that they have, know-how that they have, and at the same time transfer the know-how we have to accelerate their economic growth. And that's exactly what we are trying to do at a small scale in Namibia and Africa, where we want to produce the molecules of the future and at the same time accelerate the economic growth in that country.
Nice. Can you talk a bit more about that project?
Look, we're a shipping company. We operate 200 ships. We need to turn away from diesel to hydrogen and ammonia. You can't power ships with batteries, at least not for all your energy needs. So hydrogen and ammonia are two very important molecules, in our view, for the next 3 decades to decarbonize our business. Over the last 10 years, we've developed a technology to power our ships with hydrogen and ammonia. We use combustion engine technology, so very old technologies like with diesel engines, petrol engines. But instead of burning diesel, we burn hydrogen or ammonia. Hydrogen for small ships, when the range is short and we can refuel frequently. Hydrogen has many advantages. It's carbon-free, but it takes a lot of space. So you need to refuel frequently. And when we need to sail for longer distances, then we go to ammonia. Ammonia has a disadvantage that it's a toxic product. But in a ship, which is a very professional environment, we are used to handling toxic products. Our crew is trained for that. So that is not a problem. And then we can sail much longer distances.
And ammonia, in that sense, is also sustainable because you can, with renewable energy, you can take it from the atmosphere and use it as a fuel. Is that
so how do you produce hydrogen? You basically take water, desalinated seawater, for instance, clean electricity. You combine both in what we call an electrolyzer, and you cut the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. And then that is truly sustainable energy that you can use. Ammonia, you do exactly the same, but you will combine your hydrogen molecule with nitrogen from the air. What we breathe, 78% is nitrogen. So with an air separator, it's very easy to take nitrogen out. You combine these two molecules, you make NH3, which is ammonia. If you burn ammonia, you don't emit any CO2.
No, because it was previously just in the atmosphere and like it's cycling, right?
It's seawater, sunlight, wind, and nitrogen from the air.
Yeah,
That's basically what you use to make green ammonia. Now, the technology is there. We also know how to make these molecules, but the biggest bottleneck we have in our industry is nobody is really producing these molecules yet. Why? Because of the classical catch-22. People that want to produce it say, I don't have any demand. People that have the technology that burns it say, where are the molecules? So we're running around in circles. So that's why we decided as a company to select one area in the world where there's abundant renewable energy. And Namibia is one of these countries. There's a lot of sunlight, a lot of wind, access to water, so desalinated seawater. We're a shipping company, so we wanted to have access to the sea so that we could trade in and out, so our ships could come and collect these molecules for their own usage or to export the molecules. And that's why we got into Namibia, basically to break this chicken or the egg discussion of we have the technology, we have the ships that can be green, but we don't have the fuels.
And it's an important harbor in the world trade, Namibia?
No, and my Namibian friends will not like to hear this, but I think they know. Walvis Bay, which is the really the only big commercial port in Namibia, is a small port. But this being said, it's very well located.
Yes, exactly.
So even though it's relatively small today, and mind you, it is a very well-developed port, but it's of course much smaller than Antwerp or Rotterdam.
Yeah.
But it has a fantastic potential to develop not only into a container hub, a commodities trading hub, but also into a hub where ships will come to basically refuel green molecules.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of looking at it. And Africa is developing fast, so I think there's a lot of potential in that sense. How is the development of that? Is it like you're starting from scratch, you're working with engineers, or is all the technology readily available and just putting it in place?
No, I mean, it's an and story. You still need to develop the technology, to develop the ships on hydrogen and ammonia, to develop the electrolyzers to produce hydrogen, to develop the ammonia factory. So that technology needs to be developed, both in Africa and also here in Europe.
Yep.
You need to, of course, secure a regulatory framework. This is all new. This is where solar panels and batteries were 40 years ago. So this is kind of ground zero. You need to rewrite a lot of regulations and basically in dialogue with politicians, try to figure out a framework. And then, of course, you have the added disadvantage in Africa that these countries don't have money to support these projects. They need to find money elsewhere, from the European Union, from the United States or elsewhere. But what they do have is a very clear vision. And a lot of positive energy, a new generation of politicians and entrepreneurs there that indeed want to create added value. And I think the lack of money is compensated by a vision, a drive, and a lot of positive belief that this indeed can happen.
Wow, that's amazing to hear that, because I feel like sometimes in Europe we get stuck into legislations and things are moving slow. Is that something that sometimes frustrates you, or is it just part of the game?
It's both. It frustrates me tremendously, but unfortunately it's part of the game. I think every country in Europe realizes that if we continue down this path, we will stop creating prosperity in this area of the world, because it is tremendously difficult to start a new factory. I mean, these processes take 10, 15 years, and we need to basically turn a switch. Now, with this being said, we need to respect certain rules, of course. This cannot be the Wild West. But I think we've come in a situation where it is become nearly impossible to start any new big project in many European countries. And I think that's to our detriment.
Yeah.
Whereas in Africa, you have also rules and regulations, but they are, in my view, much more pragmatic. Of course, you will say they need investment, which is true. But they don't just take an investment at any price, any cost, and any project. They also have their own rules, but they are much more pragmatic, looking towards the future. And don't forget, it's the only continent where we will see population growth. We are in demographic decline, bar immigration. Africa will add 1 billion people in the next 3 decades. So we need to create on that continent prosperity in order to integrate all the new young people that will come into the economy.
This podcast is brought to you by the Garden of Your Dreams Masterclass. Are you struggling with finding the right tools and tricks for your garden? Are you lacking the confidence to be a self-sufficient gardener? Do you sometimes get overwhelmed by the lack of knowledge and time you have to actually do gardening? Then the Garden of Your Dreams Masterclass is for you. It's interesting because I think it was Elon Musk who said the biggest problem in the next 50 years is not going to be overpopulation. In contrary, the depopulation, that we will have too little people on the planet, and that can have a big impact. So I think that's fascinating to look at it from that standpoint. But now getting more into the way the systems works today, looking at the big impact we have on climate change, it's becoming stronger and stronger every year. We've just seen Valencia flooded in flash floods. They didn't have rain for 11 months. All of a sudden, they get so much water. The whole town was flooded. It's become mainstream news. Brazil was on fire a couple months ago. Do you think that we are still moving way too slow? And is it something that frustrates you as well? Looking okay, we have this massive problem racing towards us. We should be taking more action. Is that something that bothers you?
Yeah, okay, I'm not a politician. I'm an entrepreneur. So I think, yes, as a citizen of the world, we're not moving fast enough. But instead of complaining, let's just get on with it,
Yep.
and move ahead. And I do see a lot of companies that have this realization, definitely here in Europe, but I think Asia is following suit as well. We just mentioned Africa. They see this as a big opportunity. For the next 4 years, we'll see what happens in the United States.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Of course, the new president-elect has been very vocal of not wanting to go down that route.
No.
I think the end result might be more balanced than what people think, because there's the states in the United States that have quite a lot of power as well. You see what's happening in California, you see what's happening on the East Coast. So I don't think it will totally go away.
No.
But clearly, from a federal United States policy, we might see 4 slow years in the energy transition.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that Trump is going, like, we're going to continue the fossil fuels, but at the same time, he's actually getting a lot of interest in regenerative farming. So that's my next question. Beyond decarbonization, we also have to do regeneration. Where do you see the biggest opportunities and challenges in going beyond the decarbonization and sequestering more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere so that we can mitigate the climate change?
Again, this is not my specialty, but we follow it very closely. Capturing carbon through sustainable agriculture, through projects like biochar and other projects that are around,
Yep.
I think will be an essential part of the mix of taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, or making sure that there's no more CO2 going into the atmosphere. As a company, we have invested in certain projects, and we might accelerate these investments. But again, this is not our core business. So we would be more off-takers of these projects or supporting these projects than really building a business model around it. But will it be part of the mix? Definitely.
I think it's interesting. Let's talk a bit more about biochar, because I think there's a lot of potential looking at, there's a lot of green waste on the planet that can be used to create biochar, and one of the side products is energy, it's heat. Do you have any knowledge that this is going to be integrated in your business to create sustainable energy?
Well, we've had discussions with people that want to produce biochar, and as a side product, the energy can be used to produce, for instance, hydrogen, because hydrogen is a very energy-intensive production process. So yes, I mean we will look at these projects, and I think it can definitely complement what we do in terms of decarbonization.
Yeah, because we talked about it before our interview. Your brother is also working in regenerative farming in Peru, and they're also looking into biochar. Is it something you discuss with your brother, or how does that go?
Sure, I discuss it a lot with my brother, and I discuss it with many people that are involved in these kind of projects. I think it is not directly linked to the business of transportation by ship,
No.
but as we emit CO2 and we're looking at ways of capturing our CO2,
Yep.
this is definitely an avenue we will explore.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to the business model now is, okay, how can we produce energy neutral or CO2 neutral energy, right? With the hydrogen, solar, all the installations. And then if we can add systems that also do regeneration, I think we're getting into a really interesting mix, because I think when we use the right technologies, it can go very fast, the regeneration process, because we've been declining very fast, but I think in the upside we can regenerate very fast. So now back to the business here, CMB Tech. So how do you navigate, quite literally navigate, how do you navigate between operating a successful business and going as far as you can in innovating and going ahead in the industry? It's
Very simple. In order to invest in innovation, you need to make money. And clearly, and we have stated this many times, the money we are making by transporting fossil fuels or transporting other goods,
Yep.
we are in an accelerated way reinvesting it into low carbon solutions. So you will see nearly all of the ships that CMB Tech has on order, so new ships that will be delivered this year, next year, in 26, 27, will have low carbon technology on board. That is what we're trying to do. Now, in the end, that model only holds if the new products we put on the market can also make money. And this is where we are still in a kind of uncertain situation, because there's only a very small portion of my customers that is willing to pay to be green. The vast majority does not want to pay extra to be green. So I need to hope, and of course I need to work very hard to increase that share of customers that are willing to pay to be low carbon in order for our business model to be sustainable in the long run, because we need money, we need to make money to continue to invest in innovation. And I think this is probably the biggest challenge we're going to have in the next 5 to 10 years. But this being said, we're very hopeful and very positive, because of the last 5 years, we've really seen a total shift of mindset. Whereas nobody was willing to pay for it, we have now some people that are willing to pay for it, and we see that it's accelerating. And at the same time, we're also making our low carbon solutions cheaper. So it's coming from both sides.
Yes.
More interest on the one side, and we need to continuously work to bringing the cost down. In the end, if we are at diesel parity, as we say, if a diesel ship costs as much as a green ship, everybody will go for the green ship.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not there yet, but working very hard to get there.
And then the political pressure is there as well. With the Green Deal, Europe is taking the route
Sure,
in that.
but I think as a private company, you should never make the mistake of basing your business model on subsidies. That's very dangerous, because you have a change in politics and then suddenly the subsidies are gone. You lose the momentum. So I think, I always say that the biggest subsidy the government can give us is making sure regulations are clear.
Exactly.
And leave us, the entrepreneurs, alone within your regulatory framework.
Yeah, I agree.
That is the biggest subsidy.
Yeah.
If on top of that, you can have some mechanisms like contracts for difference. I don't know if you know that concept. It's basically to cover the gap between a green fuel and a fossil fuel. Today, there's a gap.
Yeah. In pricing.
Indeed. And governments can step in to cover that price differential and basically pay the producer of the fuel the difference for a certain period of time, and then it goes down. It's a little bit what they have done to develop the offshore wind in the North Sea. These mechanisms are definitely supportive, but as I say, we can't count only on subsidies to green the planet. We will need technology, we'll need entrepreneurs, and we'll need willing customers.
I agree. So is that also part why the recent reacquisition of Euronav in your company was such an important step forward, or why were you so committed at taking back
Euronav
control?
was part of our family company until 2004, and then we spun it off on the stock exchange. The reason we stepped back into Euronav and we fought very hard to regain control of that company is that we saw a large listed company, both in New York and in Brussels. And when you're a listed company, you can have access to capital markets in a much easier way than if you're a private company. And we saw a company that was potentially going to make a lot of money. And it turned out to be true because of the cyclicality of the markets. Tanker markets were down at one point, but after a period of time, they go up, and they did that. So we said, well, if we can use that platform to raise money for our decarbonization projects on the one hand, but at the same time, make money by transporting oil and in an accelerated way, reinvest that money into low carbon solutions, we could have the best of both worlds. And that's exactly what we did this year. On the 15th of March, basically, we concluded a long process of turning Euronav into CMB Tech, turning a pure play tanker owner into a diversified, future-proof maritime group, which is CMB Tech.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we could look at fossil fuels as like the demon of climate change, and it is a problem, but we can also use it as a solution and speed up the regeneration process. I think that's
use carbon to decarbonize.
It's quite contradictory, but
it is not. It is not. I think the biggest gains one can make to decarbonize the economy is to tackle the sectors that are emitting most CO2. Invest in these companies to accelerate the reduction in CO2. I mean, of course, you need to invest in startups and scale-ups and innovation and green companies. But the biggest gains are in the companies that are emit the most. And on top of it, most of these companies today are profitable. So you can use these profits to reinvest in green solutions. And by the way, this is not only Euronav CMB Tech story. There's many different stories of coal mines, coal groups that turn into offshore wind energy groups. Companies that were making diesel engines that are making batteries today. So it's not a contradiction.
No, I think I agree. I even heard a statement, somebody saying back to the developing countries, like they should burn through their fossil fuels faster so they can go to a way faster industrial revolution than we. It took us 200 years to be where we are now. And like you said, the developing countries it's different. They have innovation, so they should go through it even faster. I think nobody has the right to tell them, like, okay, you should stop burning fossil fuels, because it's only going to limit the amount of innovation that they can make to speed up the process and then to go away from carbon. So I think that's a very important take to look at. Now, I'm curious, because you're running quite a big company that is working on a variety of projects. How do you delegate your own day? What are you mostly working on from a day-to-day basis? Is it different every day, or you're looking at all of the parts of the company?
Of course, it's different every day, but I have a fantastic team, so we work very well together. And I'm just trying to make sure that all the projects that we initiate, they find sufficient financing, that we find the customers, that it's operationally working well. But I can count on fantastic teams that are supporting me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So now also looking at the next 10 years, what do you think will be the biggest challenges, and what are the opportunities that are going to come from tackling those challenges?
It's very easy. For us, it's access to the fuel. I don't see technology as being a challenge anymore. Of course, we need to fine-tune it. We need to make it cheaper. We need to scale it up. But technology is there. It is just getting access to the fuel. That is going to be the most important one. So we need to produce hydrogen and ammonia at a large scale, because it's not only shipping that needs to decarbonize with these molecules. There's a lot of other industrial sectors that will need these molecules. For instance, agriculture as well. Yep. You cannot electrify everything. No. What we can electrify, connect to the grid or go to battery, we should do it. That's the easiest, the most efficient way of doing it. But there are certain sectors, like long-haul road transportation for trucks, like shipping, like steel production, like the cement industry, where you don't have ready-made solutions based on electricity. Airplanes, indeed. That's even more complex than shipping. So there you will need a large amount of green molecules. And in my book, that's hydrogen or hydrogen-based, which is then normally ammonia.
Yeah. I think Rolls-Royce is working on a hydrogen engine for airplanes. You might be familiar with that. So it's interesting to see it's working in different industries. So do you stay connected? How do you stay connected in all the updates that are happening globally?
But again, we have a great team that is, has the finger on the pulse, following everything which is happening. Logically, when you are in the hydrogen economy, people come and see you. Of course, we see other people. It's a very vibrant ecosystem, but it's an ecosystem which is suffering financially. Because let's be clear, there's been a hydrogen hype 2-3 years ago. A lot of these companies have gone bankrupt, fallen down again. So this is not a nice line of growth. It's up and down, and it's sometimes very tough.
Why is that? Do you think that they get too enthusiastic, or?
No, I think it's just a process. This is a radical change. The energy transition that we have today is very radical, and so it's logical that things don't change overnight. Don't forget, in the past, and referring to our industry only, but I think you can make the analogy to other sectors. When we change technology, usually, nearly in all the cases, it meant the technology was better and cheaper. Now, this time round, you are asking an industry like mine to shift to something which is worse, much more complicated as a technology, and much more expensive. So there's a lot of resistance. And so the way you can solve this is, of course, to make it more efficient, to make it better, and to make it cheaper, but that takes time, or through regulation. But it's always much more difficult to impose new technologies through regulation than bottom up, because it's just a better thing to use.
How do you think that if we could balance like the impact the fossil fuels, if we could put a price on what the fossil fuels
have an impact on our environment, and how it's, for example, having an impact on insurance companies that have to deal with a lot of the damage that's being done by natural catastrophic events. Like, if we could put a price on that, it would become way more evident to use the green technologies, because it's becoming very, very expensive to rebuild all of these communities. Do you see a way to solve that?
Yeah, through taxes. But again, telling you, there's a lot of reluctance on taxes. There's a lot of resistance. People don't like to pay taxes.
Yeah.
So it's always going to be more difficult to impose technology through taxes than if the technology is better and cheaper.
Yeah.
But again, we've seen it with a lot of recent technological innovations. I mentioned solar panels and batteries. They have gone through the same cycle. And look at how much it costs now. Solar panels and batteries. They've become very, very cheap.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think we have a great conversation going on here, but I have to be respectful of your time. To finalize it, I would like a message that you talk to young people that are looking to get started in an industry or have a positive impact on the environment and build a business around it. What is your single most important advice for them to get started?
Just do it. Come and join us. I think it's a fascinating world we live in. A transition world is understanding what happened in the past, what is happening today, and looking forward on how we can change the future, but with very concrete examples. I think any young person that wants to start, go to a company that is doing things, not only talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think definitely at CMB Tech, that's what we're trying to do. And we don't do everything right, but we must be doing something right, because I think a lot of people come and want to work for us. And I'm very delighted and honored that they want to do that. So they're more than welcome.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And thank you for sharing your time and sharing your expertise. I think it's a great example of how we can do something that is good for the environment, even though it's like in one of the most difficult industries, one of the most polluting industries. You're in the forefront of changing that. So congratulations on that. And thank you very much for coming on the show, Alexander Saverys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mathieu. Thank you very much.